A Tom Mueller book promises to dig in deep and shine the light of truth on fraud. An investigative journalist turned author, his first book, Extra Virginity, looked at the links between the history of olive oil, culture, and crime. In 2019, his well-timed sophomore effort, Crisis of Conscience, was a thorough look at the world of whistleblowers and fraud.
It's clear, though, there's consequences to being a whistleblower, and the president has made it very clear he wants to find out who the first whistleblower is. And in Politico, you wrote recently, if history is any indication, the current whistleblower might end up regretting coming forward altogether. What did you mean by that in this current context?
This bestseller planted the seed for what became 2023's book, How to Make a Killing. A look at the shocking world of U.S. healthcare through the lens of the dialysis industry, where a miracle cure for many becomes a nightmare. Tonight, let's see what happens when an investigative reporter, a doctor, a culinary instructor, and a professor walk into the Myrtle. Please welcome Tom Mueller to the Northwest Passages stage.
Curly.
I'm so far away. I feel like I should come closer to you. So the last time we talked, you didn't make this easy because we were going to talk about whistleblowers right as an impeachment was happening. So I'm glad you made it easier this year. My goodness. So your book has been amazing, but there hasn't, and it comes on the heels of your other books. What I appreciated was it's not 800 pages like the last one. I have a strict 800-word-a-day limit. So I want to know why this story. What made you pick this time around?
Yeah, I stumbled into dialysis while writing about whistleblowing, and I encountered this world where corporations were settling massive legal action for wrongdoing with massive checks, and yet their stock price was continuing to soar. And it stuck in my mind as a strange sort of anomaly. There didn't seem to be any downside to it, and who knew there was this much money in the industry? And then I started talking to patients, and I started talking to caregivers, and that's when, frankly, it went from a casual interest to a deep passion to get to the bottom of it, and also to drive change, because what I found was really not acceptable.
What's been the reaction to this book?
It's been very interesting, very binary. On the one hand, press, apart from the Spokesman-Review, has been completely and utterly silent. With my previous books, I've gotten reviews in the New York Times and CNN and various other recognition. This one, you can hear the crickets. I mean, it is absolutely ignored. And I can't help but think that perhaps part of the reason why we've gotten to the stage we've gotten in dialysis and other parts of healthcare in certain areas is precisely because of the silence of the mainstream press. On the other hand, the reaction of people within the industry, patients, caregivers, lawyers, a number of regulators of various kinds, but above all, patients have written to me to say, finally, someone is telling the story. Finally. Or, yes, you're right about this, this, and this, but you forgot this. And by the way, here are the documents, which, as a journalist is pretty heartening. And a number of people have said, I had no idea. This was happening in my clinic, but I had no idea that was part of the business model. So it's been, and a number of nephrologists have invited me to speak at medical schools, nursing schools. In fact, I'm addressing the WSU nursing school tomorrow. It's been heartening from the point of view of insiders who really know what's going on. I've had some criticism, and I welcome that. I mean, the part of the reason why I wrote this book, the main reason I wrote this book, is to start a conversation because above all else, I don't pretend to be the world's authority in dialysis. That's why I have far more distinguished panelists than I am, who really are the experts. But I have become something of an expert in experts. And if I can get enough people doing enough conversations about this problem, we can, I think real change can happen. Things have gotten bad enough that change needs to happen, and the thousands of messages I've gotten from insiders sends that message. But also, dialysis is a kind of a microcosm of some of the problems we have in healthcare overall. So I think figuring out what to do about dialysis could point the way to bigger solutions as well.
So you're talking about the power of these conversations. Do you have any idea what's next? I mean, what if you could wave a magic wand, what does that outcome look like?
Well, first of all, there is, I do have an idea what should happen, and I've had a lot of really, really good conversations. I just come from DC, talking with a number of people who might help to drive change. I'm hoping over the next year to have a lot of conversations like this and get a lot of people thinking. But, in a nutshell, monopolies are not good. We need to revisit just how much control certain companies have over the healthcare system, over the dialysis system. And certain basic things that people taught us at UW back in the 60s and 70s, like home dialysis is a really good thing. We need to make sure that happens. Proper staffing levels, which SEIU, UHW, and other unions have been pushing for some time. You can't do healthcare properly when you're understaffed. And that's a nightmare for the patient, but also for the workers. There are a series of very clear problems that I outline in my book, and I want to say, I also want to say that, two things. Number one, legal disclaimer. Almost everything I wrote in my book is categorically denied by the two companies that I call out in my book. So you should know that and read the book and draw your own conclusions. But number two, there are an enormous number of fantastic people and very committed healers who are working in the two companies that I call out and other companies that I call out, and who are doing a fantastic job. I do not want to paint the entire industry and every worker with the same brush. It's simply that two large corporations that are rigorously for-profit have created a number of negative incentives that cause a certain kind of healthcare. And in America, it means that people on dialysis, compared to all of the developed nations, die, 1 to 2 times faster.
Yeah.
And that just can't happen. That should not happen. That's what got its hooks into me.
What has struck me about tonight is we've been doing these for over 5 years, and it's the first time we've ever had an author say, I'd like to bring on panelists because we have to have change happen. And I was blown away by that, because most authors just want to talk about their book and the processes, and so it amazed me that you wanted to do this. And then when I saw who you were inviting, I was like, wow, do you think they'll say yeah? So let's bring up our first guest. Dr. Katherine Tuttle is Executive Director of Research at Providence. And yeah. And for this night, look, I'm going to ask some questions, but I think it would be much better if you all are having a conversation. I'm just going to kind of throw some things out there, and then you guys please take it from there. So, Tom, if I don't ask the right questions, you follow up. Yes, so sir. I want to know, how treatable is this disease?
In the current era, it's eminently treatable. 3/4 of kidney failure is due to diabetes and hypertension, both preventable conditions primordially, meaning reducing the risk factors reduces the chance of getting kidney failure. We are at a transformative moment in medicine where we have the most powerful tools ever to save kidneys, hearts, and lives. This is a moment not only in nephrology, but in medicine and the human condition. For example, the SGLT2 inhibitors that we now have reduce all-cause mortality by 1/3, kidney failure by half, and the major cause of death, heart failure, by 25%. But the problem is that people are not being detected and getting these therapies, but that's the first of a parade of new therapies. We have other therapies that block other pathways, including aldosterone, and most recently you may have heard of Ozempic, semaglutide, Full disclosure, I am on the executive committee and wrote the protocol. That trial was stopped early for overwhelming efficacy. This almost never happens in a clinical trial for any condition. The bar to stop a trial for benefit is extremely high. That's all that I can say, but we have the most powerful tools ever. And we now have a moral and ethical obligation to make sure that all patients who could benefit receive these therapies. And if we get it right, the need for dialysis will be dramatically reduced.
That was one of the things when we first met a couple months ago, Kathy. You said, yeah, you wrote a book about dialysis, but really, dialysis should be obsolete. And that's kind of where we're headed, right? And where we should be headed.
When we stopped the semaglutide trial, a colleague of mine at Stanford said that dialysis will become the LVAD of nephrology. LVADs are left ventricular assist devices reserved for patients with the most severe form of heart failure that they cannot survive without them. We have those tools available now. There is no excuse for the number of people that we have on dialysis in this country or in the world.
So you're talking about a moral imperative as well as a medical imperative. And is it not also true that just dollars and cents, we'd save an enormous amount? Not only would it be more compassionate, morally right, but we'd save an enormous amount of money by preventing kidney failure?
And the problem with the U.S. healthcare system is we focus on very short-term outcomes. Because we have a private health insurance system, people change health insurance every 1, 2, or 3 years. There's no incentive to invest in the long term. The benefit of these things plays out over much longer periods of time, like over a decade. And until we have an investment in the future, the payers are focusing on their costs for the next year. The drugs are expensive. The prices should go down. But if you look at over 10 years, the cost, even if you just look at it financially of dialysis versus the medicine, the calculus is self-evident. But the problem is that we have a healthcare system that is so short-term, we can't see beyond the next year's budget.
One of the people I quote, Alonzo Plau, the chief medical officer or chief science officer of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, said, "It's much more profitable to catch people at the precipice of death and treat them than to prevent them from ever reaching that precipice."
No, you should answer that.
How do we get that word out? I mean, it makes moral sense, it makes ethical sense, it makes fiscal sense. Why are we not doing it?
We need a public health campaign, and we need advocacy, and we need health policy change. Tom, you and I were both in Washington, D.C. last week. Believe it or not, there is a kidney caucus in Congress. I met with them last week to discuss these topics exactly. And actually, the chair of the kidney caucus is a cardiothoracic surgeon from Indiana who totally gets this. He sees what devastation it causes in his own patients. But the problem is that it has not been on the radar. We have not had advocacy. We do have patient organizations that are finally, thank goodness, standing up and speaking their truth. But, there's not something very sexy about urine. To quote one of my colleagues, we've done a great job with cancer and heart disease, and we should. My goodness, look at the progress that we've made. But we need people to stand up, particularly from the patient community, and speak their truth. Did you know that Tina Turner had a kidney transplant? Stevie Wonder has had a kidney transplant. But we don't hear from these celebrities. And there's some stigma about this because kidney disease is a disease of the disenfranchised. It is largely determined by social determinants of health. It is the poster child for the disparities that have been uncovered by COVID, but were always there. These are diseases of people who are poor and who live in places that we don't want to look at. So it's time to shine that light. And I would actually challenge people from the patient community, and you'll hear from some of them tonight, who are brave enough to step forward and say it's important and it matters to them personally and it matters for the public health and for the humanity of all of us.
So with all of the obstacles you've just laid out, I mean, is it even realistic to think of a world largely without chronic kidney disease?
The aspirational goal of the American Society of Nephrology is a world without kidney diseases, because it is possible if we get it right. We meet in Washington, D.C. next week, and that is going to be the theme of the meeting. But we can't do it alone. Nephrology has not been very visible to all of you, yet 1 in 5 Americans in our healthcare system have chronic kidney disease, but they go undetected and unrecognized because it has not been a priority for policy or for payers. And part of the problem is we sold the farm to the large dialysis organizations. I remember the day before they existed when the dialysis centers were owned by our healthcare systems and where the incentive was to keep people healthy. And that was our last resort. And part of the problem is health policy and incentives, because those of you who are in healthcare or business know this. What gets measured and what gets paid for is what gets done. And until we prioritize this and we measure it and we pay for good outcomes, we will not see the transformation in care that is entirely possible based on the science and the therapies that we now have available to us. If we had a treatment that reduced the mortality of lung cancer by 30%, don't you think it would be on the headline of the New York Times and everyone would be up in arms that all patients with lung cancer should get this treatment? We have 40 million Americans with chronic kidney disease, and nobody has said a word.
Right. We have our work cut out for us, but there is the data is super clear. I mean, and I don't want to be self-serving. The fact that the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times and all the other times ignored this book may have something to do with that stigma that you mentioned, may have something, we have marches for breast cancer and for, but this one somehow, people seem, almost to be ashamed.
One of my friends said, boobs are sexy, pee is not. But you know what? Everybody pees. If you're lucky, right? As a nephrologist, I say, congratulations, go pee.
Well, I go into that in some detail in my book, because until you stop peeing, you don't realize what a wonder it is, what a miracle it is, right?
It's gold. Actually, one of my colleagues in the front row was talking to me about when she was a medical student and she went to London to do a rotation in kidney transplant. And she saw the little dead kidney be transplanted in, and then how it pinked up and it produced a golden elixir. And honestly, transplant teams, I don't mean to be too emotional with you, but often many people will tear up at the appearance of that. It is a miracle, and we have taken it for granted.
Well, this is just the beginning of this discussion, and I want to bring up Duane Sunwold, who is a culinary instructor at Spokane Community College. Duane? So go ahead. No, go ahead.
That was heavy.
Well,
that's how we are.
That's how we roll.
I hope I can lighten it up just a little.
No, your job here is to lighten it up. You're the food guy.
My claim to fame is I can blow bubbles standing at the urinal.
Okay. Well, Duane, let's talk about, is there a miracle diet, or is it just eating healthy?
Well,
walk us through that.
I want everyone to know that foamy urine is a symptom of kidney disease. So if you can blow bubbles in the bathroom, you probably should have your kidneys checked. And I was very good at it for a very long time.
It's proteinuria. And proteinuria is the harbinger of kidney function decline. It's very serious. Part of the problem is people don't feel bad until they're nearly dead.
Yeah. So kidney disease is divided into 5 stages, 5 being the worst, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was like 4.9. Yeah, our bodies can compensate for a really long period of time. and no one ever checked my kidneys. I was in and out of my primary care physician's office for 3 months with hypertension and migraines, and they never once thought to look at your kidney function.
Duane, I was wondering if you could walk us through, from your expertise, what does the diet look like to help this?
So, Dr. Tuttle is the only nephrologist that ever talked to me about diet, and I had seen 4 other nephrologists. And like a good patient, I didn't listen to her for a few months later. And I got slapped by a friend of mine who's a clinical dietitian who said, I want to do an experiment. I want to take you off of animal protein for 90 days and let's see what happens. And I said, great, I'll do it. But she said, I want you to start Monday morning. And I said, why Monday morning? And she goes, because I want you to have the weekend to eat what you want. Now, when she told me this, I was 75 pounds heavier than what's in front of you because of the treatment I was on. And I heard, eat as much as you want. So my first night of my all-meat weekend, I decided to have pepperoni pizza with extra cheese. High in sodium, high in fat, high in protein. So about 2 in the morning, I thought I caught the flu, and I was sick all weekend. I never ate anything else all weekend long. And I'm a little slow. It took me till Sunday afternoon to realize the pizza had done this to me. Well, it was my kidneys who said, no more pizza. So Monday morning, I woke up motivated to try this diet. And within 2 weeks of just removing animal protein and eating a low-sodium diet, I actually started feeling better. And over a couple of years, I was able to wean myself off of all medication.
How unusual. How unusual is Duane's case, being on the verge of kidney failure, pulled back from the brink, and now off of all medication? How difficult is that?
Well, Duane is exceptional in many ways. Part of it is his ability to really adhere to a regimen, so I want to give him credit for that. Most people will improve with lifestyle modification. Not everyone will have the benefit that Duane had, just to be honest with you. And for his type of disease, he had received appropriate medical therapy, and truthfully, I think it was the combination, it was and both. And then after you got healthier, we were able to then wean off the immune-suppressing medicines. But I think it speaks to the power of lifestyle modification, which is often ignored and should be really the foundation upon which we layer drug therapies. One of the most important things that I think Duane illustrates is that not only stabilization is possible, but we now can talk about remission. And that's really important for giving patients hope. It's not a fait accompli, but we have to catch you at a point where it's still possible. And that's where earlier detection and intervention is critical.
Duane, what did the rest of that diet look like when you got on Monday? Walk us through what that looked like. What were you eating?
I thought I was eating a typical American diet. Now, being a culinary instructor, we eat in restaurants, so we don't eat the healthiest, I admit, okay?
But you eat what everyone else wants to eat.
Right. So we tried. But I thought I was eating fairly healthy compared to an average American diet. Once with kidney disease, you're so sensitive to sodium, which means salt. I immediately started cutting back on the sodium, but I had no idea that animal protein could be so difficult on your kidneys. And what I actually love my kidney disease, and I know that's the weirdest thing people will ever tell you. It has taught me so much about the culinary field. I am totally now all about teaching people how to eat plant-based or more plant-dominant. We now have students who totally understand when you come to a restaurant with a dietary constraint, they get the fact they don't want to make you sick, they want to follow what you're asking us to do. And there aren't any other culinary schools in this country that teaches how to cook for kidney patients. So,
Duane also, I'm going to call him out, does a lot of advocacy work for the National Kidney Foundation. He writes a regular column called The Chef's Corner, and he's worked very hard to educate patients and professionals about a healthful diet, and particularly with a focus on reducing not only kidney disease progression, but symptoms of kidney disease. And before we had dialysis, the only treatment was a low-protein diet, because protein is so excessively toxic, and it's those waste products that are, if you will, driving the uremic syndrome that make people so terribly ill.
So Duane, when you go out to restaurants, and what do you order? What do you tell people to order?
So the best advice I could give anybody who's on a special diet is call ahead to the restaurant and tell the chef what your dietary constraints are. They're really creative people, and if they have some time, they would love to do something different and unique for you. The other thing I try to teach patients is you should just have a laminated card with your dietary constraints on it and just have that passed right back to the kitchen. Now, I've had some major screw-ups, too. I've also told someone I need a plant-based meal, and they've given me an egg white omelet. So you have to do training everywhere you go. And I'm a teacher, so I will teach anywhere, anytime.
He also has done a magnificent TED Talk that you all should listen to if you haven't already.
Well, let's move on here. So let's bring out Andrew. Andrew Storfer is the Eastlick Distinguished Professor at Washington State University, and we'd love to talk about your unique position in all of this.
Thank you.
Let's start with your unique position. You literally have a different point of view than most. You bring something different to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually a patient. I was diagnosed with lupus at the age of 15 with kidney disease, and at the time was given 6 months to a year to live. And they told me I would need imminently a kidney transplant. So one message I want to give folks is that the power of positive thinking is real. And I told them, no, I'm not going to need a kidney transplant, and I'm not going to die in a year. And obviously I didn't, because I'm sitting here almost 40 years later. The second thing, sort of related to what everyone's saying, and one of the main messages I want to give people about the increased corporatization of medicine across America, and this is regardless of if you have kidney disease or anything else, because everybody has some sort of health problem, is be an informed consumer of medicine, be an educated, informed consumer, not a passive recipient. I think classically people just trust the doctor, but ask questions, educate yourself. If you see foamy urine, ask for a kidney test. There's something called the basic metabolic panel. It looks at basic kidney function, and this can be done much ahead of time, as Dr. Tuttle mentioned, and treatments and therapies and dietary changes can help stave off. My situation was a little different because the lupus attacked my kidneys and sort of did a bunch of damage and scarring really early on. And, this was almost an inevitability for me, but I did fortunately, stave off needing dialysis for 40 years, so.
Well, what I was really hoping is that you all have forgotten more about this than I know. So I would love if you all would take over, and then I want to have them ask some questions. So what do you all want to ask each other? Tom?
Well, Andrew, I just wanted to ask, what was your impression when you read my book? I mean, what was as a patient, as someone who has experienced some of this, what did I get wrong? What did I get right? What did I, and...
So, I would say that all the people I've dealt with, some are sitting up here, some are sitting out there, have really been great. And I go to a smaller clinic, but now I do peritoneal dialysis, which is actually done at home, so I still go into the clinic about twice a month for checkups and follow-ups and labs. But if you talk to them, they all admit to the corporate pressure of certain elements. So one sort of small example that is the the flip side happens when you're on dialysis, which is dialysis strips away protein, so you actually need to go on a high-protein diet, which is sort of counterintuitive, because here I was limiting protein, going on plant-based protein. It's almost impossible to eat enough plant-based. I'd have to eat like 4 pounds of tofu a day to have enough protein, so I had to go back to some leaner meats. But they give you protein supplement bars, and I looked at them and I read the ingredients, and one of the ingredients was really high phosphorus. Now, it turns out when you have kidney failure, your body's very bad at getting rid of phosphorus. And dialysis is also very bad at getting rid of phosphorus. It's the one thing dialysis can't really help with. So here they are, probably because the big corporate company got a really good deal on these bars. They pay 30 cents, and then, you know, in the patient bill, they charge $5 or $10 for them or whatever. But they're absolute junk food. They're full of sugar. So I talked to the nutritionist, and I found a bar called Aloha bars that are all organic. They have like 8 ingredients. They have monk fruit sweetener. They have way less sugar, and they have the exact same amount of fully plant-based protein. I showed it to the nutritionist, and she said, yeah, these are a lot better. But as you mentioned, this is often a disease of the impoverished, and these bars are expensive. So do you get the free bar in the clinic, which is really not that good for you, which is basically a candy bar that has a lot of protein? Or do you find your own? And this is what I mean about being an educated consumer, but also some of us are in the unfortunate financial position of not being able to do it and having to take what they give you.
You also mentioned to me that you prefer to keep your condition private because you're a highly successful professor. You didn't want people to sort of, or you didn't feel like you wanted to bring that out into the open. However, you also need a transplant, right? And at that point, you had to sort of say, well, if I don't speak up, that issue is not going to be resolved. Is that a hard situation to be in?
Yeah, it was really hard at first. I did keep the disease very private. Very few people knew, only people close to me, because I didn't want to be pitied. I didn't want to be treated, you could call me a type A personality. I wanted to pursue my dream career as a biology professor, which I was able to do. Often doctors recommended not doing things, like I got into a course to study whales as an undergraduate, and they said, there's too much sun in Hawaii. And I said, well, what if I just wear hats and lots of sunscreen and, long sleeve shirts? That's a good idea. And so I went anyway, right? Despite, I did what but I took extra precautions along the way. And then I sort of had to get over myself, which was, even though end stage, I'm considered disabled right now. I could go on disability. I still work full time. I have no intention of stopping unless I get a kidney transplant, and then I kind of will have to stop for a few months. But a constellation of things have happened in the last several months. One is I had to get over myself because, at least in my close circle, there were no eligible living kidney donors. So I am on deceased donor lists, but I wanted to get the word out because I do intend to live for a while longer. But the second thing that happened is, it's really a constellation of things. The other thing that happened is I teach a course called evolutionary medicine. And a lot of what we talk about in that course is the mismatch of modern humans with our current environment. Biologically, we haven't evolved in about 50,000 years as a species. Yet, in the last 200 years, just about every aspect of our lifestyle has changed. Unless you're a subsistence farmer that grows organic food in your backyard, the diet is completely different. People have migrated to different parts of the world, which has caused different things. And then the socioeconomic disparities that exist, the wide socioeconomic disparities that exist, prevent groups of people from getting access to higher quality foods. And then the third thing that happened is I've been actually working on genomics of a strange infectious cancer in Tasmanian devils, but I realized that my skills in this area, studying genomics of disease, could start to be applied in studying more precision medicine of kidney disease. And the other thing is, I'm in a unique position of being a scientist, a teacher, and a patient myself. And so I realized I can actually start helping people. I can talk to people, I can explain things to people, I can talk on the level of a doctor, but I can talk also on the level of an uneducated patient or a slightly educated patient. So I think now's my sort of time it's sort of a sea change for me that I really feel like I can start to help people in a variety of different ways. So that's why I'm part of the reason I'm sitting here today.
And I want to say another way Andrew is a patient hero is he was a participant in a clinical trial, IMPA-Kidney.
Yep.
And empagliflozin is one of those SGLT2 inhibitors that has delivered the unprecedented benefits. And Andrew started the trial late in the course of his disease, and he did end up on dialysis, but what he has allowed us to learn will help many more people, millions of people worldwide. So in addition to his own research and teaching and advocacy, he was what I would call a patient hero because he volunteered for a clinical trial that helps us do better for everybody. So give him another hand of applause.
It wasn't even a question. I mean, I get research, so it was like, oh, I can, help you with data, great.
So, Tom, you brought up that there just hasn't been as much interest as we think there could be in this. I mean, we have 150, 200 people here tonight, but this easily should have been 700 people. What do we do? How do you get people to care? I mean, by the way, in journalism school, they talk about $20 quotes. You've had a bunch of them. I mean, you keep talking about peas not being sexy. If that didn't make it in the paper, it ought to. What do we do other than say things like that? I mean, how do we get people to understand how important this is?
Yeah, the bad news may also be the good news. The bad news in the dialysis area, the bad news in kidney care in general, the bad news in American healthcare. We all know that something radical has to happen real soon. We have all reached the point, whether or not we have kidney disease. If anyone has had any interface with the medical profession, and practitioners of the medical profession, we all know that something radical has to change, and soon. Just looking at the two hockey sticks of where the U.S. is in terms of expenditures per patient and outcomes per patient since the mid to late 70s, it's just, it is immoral, it is silly, it's not the way a society should behave, and it costs an enormous amount. So even if you want to be just a total utilitarian and not care about human beings, we're still being taken for a ride. So, just looking into this, not as a medical professional, but as a concerned citizen and as a journalist, this for me is a microcosm that is fixable. I mean, let's face it, this is fixable. There are two corporations that control the lives of 80% of the patient population. They have flown under the radar of the FTC for the longest time, and economists have written, distinguished economists have written papers about this situation, the dialysis industry. And one is called "How to Get Away with Merger." I mean, this is a thing. The FTC has been asleep at the switch. They need to do their jobs. But once, that's the sort of macro, and the broader societal thing is, as Dr. Tuttle and all of us have been saying, that we have to realize that these kidneys are magic. We talk about people with brains, with guts, with heart, but not kidneys. And the kidneys are what creates the homeostasis, this sort of internal balance for which all the other organs rely. They're the sort of the conductors of our biological orchestra. They make it all possible. And somehow we've forgotten that. Somehow we've put that in the back of our priorities, and at the same time, homeostasis as an individual, our balance that keeps us healthy. I just feel like there's a parallel between how we treat some of our most vulnerable patients and how our societal homeostasis has suffered. I mean, we're out of balance. And so somehow this industry and this disease, for me, has come to be not only a problem to be fixed from a medical point of view, from a communications point of view, but it's also a symbol of how we need to regain some semblance of balance in our society. And I think the profit compassion balance is out of whack, and we need to fix that.
You know, one of my favorite parts of the evening is when we let our audience ask questions, and I would love to turn it all over to you all now. Christy is going to have a mic, so all I got to do is raise your hand, and Phil Donahue style, we're coming to you. So,
I just want to say first that we have some dialysis patients in the audience and on stage, but also in the audience, and just really thank you for coming and for listening to this and for being strong. I mean, I've never met stronger people in my life than the people I've interviewed.
Thank you for making this first one on the first floor. I appreciate that.
Just really thank you for kudos for bringing out the emblematic problem in this niche of kidney disease. But what I'd like to see the panel, you and Katherine and others, discuss is what may be a more broad solution to the medical system as it's devolved currently to what seems to be an inexorable decline. Is it healthcare for all? Is it socialized medicine? Is it dissolution of the insurance industry? Or what do you see may be a solution?
I think we need health policy change that prioritizes major public health problems. And this is one that's been a disparity by disease state. You know, we've done a pretty good job in some other areas that we've called out: cardiovascular disease, cancer, even HIV, AIDS. But I think we need to prioritize major clinical problems and have it less politicized. And to that point, though, I think we do need health policy change and advocacy, and we do need patients actually to stand up, because the people who make policy listen to patients. And that is starting to happen, but we need louder voices, because this is one of the most common chronic conditions that has had the least attention in terms of awareness, detection, and intervention. And as I said before, I wouldn't take anything away from all the progress that's been made in other fields. I congratulate it, I celebrate it. But this is a disparity by disease state where we need to bring kidney disease up on the level playing field and where it's addressed. And again, from our own healthcare system and the Cure CKD registry that I run, 1 in 5 patients who walks into that healthcare system has chronic kidney disease, but only 10% are diagnosed. And that's why we have the horrible outcomes. Because if we can diagnose people, there's a lot we can do about it, but we also need to incentivize treatment rather than failure. The big money should not be in treating kidney failure. And in fact, that ignores the 90% of people who die on the road to kidney failure. So I think the nephrology community owns part of this, and many of us are working very hard. Like I said, I was on the Hill last week and at the National Academy of Sciences, and not to my own credit, but to give a voice to this problem at the national level. But it takes many voices, but the most important voices are sitting right here and in the audience, who say it matters. We have a lot to offer to this world. We are worthy of awareness, detection, intervention, especially when we have the most powerful tools ever to save kidneys and lives. It is just, to me, morally corrupt that we have not given this the attention that it deserves based on the impact to the public and to individuals.
Can I want to add a quick story. I have been up on the Capitol Hill multiple times advocating as a patient. And our government representatives will only hear me when I sit down with them and say, wheat protein is good for kidneys, and all of a sudden I get their attention, and that because the wheat farmers are voting them into office. Once again, everything comes back to food. Sorry, that's just my world, but until I explained that to them, they weren't going to listen how to help kidney patients.
Another question way up here.
Hi, thanks. I actually have two questions for Andrew. Hopefully both will be short, but the first one, well, thank you, first of all, for bringing this. This is such an important topic. I'm a pharmacist, and I've been seeing this crisis for a long time, and it's very concerning. I wanted to ask Andrew, first of all, you're doing peritoneal dialysis, I understand, which is at home. Just wondering, what kind of impact does that have on your day-to-day life as far as how it changes how you're able to travel or that kind of stuff? And the second question is, I'll just ask it because it's maybe more important. I'm just wondering, have you made any progress at all on the Tasmanian devil cancer thing?
The answer to both questions is yes. No, so the peritoneal dialysis, I mean, it's a daily commitment. They'll tell you, oh, you have lots of freedom. And I mean, in a sense, you do compared to hemodialysis because you can start when you want, but, you know, I have a dog, and she wants to eat breakfast at 7 in the morning. So, you know, I have to start usually by about 10 o'clock at night. What gives me joy is I've turned it into a game for the dog. So she's pretty smart for a pug. If you had pugs, my last pug was dumb. This one's pretty smart. And we turned it into, because she has to be out of the room when I'm setting up. The room has to be as clean as possible, all air off. You need to have as sterile a connection as possible, or you can get peritonitis, which is a really nasty infection that you don't want to get. So we have puzzle time. So she has a variety of puzzles, and I hide treats in them. And just seeing the joy on her face for puzzle time, you know, lets me get set up, and then she waits quietly outside the door. So, but it is, you know, it's a nightly commitment, and sometimes it hurts, quite honestly. And the technical details are the catheter sits in your sort of lower abdomen, and if your omentum starts touching it, the omentum is part of this. It's a highly innervated part of your, you know, inner sort of body cavity, and it can be painful sometimes. Most of the time it isn't. And, you know, you do it while you sleep, so there's some benefits there. Travel is, you know, they make it sound easy, but you're taking 9 liters of fluid per day of travel. So, you know, if for a weekend and my trunk is full, if I want to drive somewhere for a weekend. But I've done it, and, you know, it's doable. Certainly I would travel. I'm used to traveling a lot more. And part of it also is, you know, I'm on 2 kidney transplant lists, and I don't really want to be leaving the Pacific Northwest in case something comes up. So the Tasmanian devil is a longer conversation, but we've done a lot of stuff with understanding devil evolution in response to the disease, and a lot of sort of genomic work, which would be the same sort of tools that we could use, that I could be using to perhaps persist with better understanding chronic kidney disease. So this may be a natural sort of shift for me in research focus. It's not going to happen overnight, but at least I'm getting introduced to a few of the people in the field and having some discussions.
Andrew, I have a question about you being on the kidney donor list. You said you're on 2 lists, and how long have you been on?
Correct. Yeah, you can. The way they do it now, it's a 250-mile radius. It used to be a zone-based thing, and you know, advice to anyone who needs a kidney transplant is to be on more than 1 list. And it is quite a workup. They take 20-odd vials of blood, and they test you from head to toe, and each center has its own testing. So, but yes, I'm on the list at Sacred Heart here in Spokane, and also at the University of Washington. At Sacred Heart, I've been active for a little over a year. At the University of Washington, I think I've been active for a little over 6 months now. So,
Question here in the front row.
Dr. Tuttle. Yeah, you brought up something that just brought tears to my eyes. Is there a track, and I'm bringing this up because when I was in my 20s, my late 20s, I was told I had diabetes. You go from the oral medication, then they put you on insulin. And at that time, I was told by my doctor, you're going to end up needing a transplant. No one ever talked to me about kidney health at the time. No one ever talked to me about prevention. So the years go by, and I'm one of those people, I do what I'm supposed to do. I changed my diet, I did all this stuff, and then I go and see my doctor one day. He said, it's time. You know, you need to go see Dr. Carson. You need a nephrologist. And I go, okay. And then I go see him, and then they tell me, okay, it's time. You need a transplant. And I feel like hearing you speak, I was put on this track. No one ever said anything to me about, let's talk about prevention. Let's talk about possible remission, keeping you healthy. And I'll wait for your response by saying, hey, anybody who don't think peeing is sexy, wait till you can't do it no more. One of the things they don't tell you, when you go to sleep at night, you dream about peeing.
So thank you for that question. One of the things that I rarely admit is I'm an endocrinologist and a nephrologist, and my journey started in diabetes at Washington University in St. Louis, nearly 40 years ago, where we were studying sort of the basics of metabolic physiology. And we used an artificial pancreas called the biostatter, which filled an entire room, and people today have a button and a cell phone that do that, right? The automated glucose and insulin delivery system. And what became evident to me is exactly what you said. We were ignoring the fact that people were dying in front of us. Complications weren't even on the radar. And I had this epiphany as I saw my own people in my studies starting to crater. And I realized what was killing them was kidney disease. So then I pivoted and I went to the University of Texas and became a nephrologist. My life's work has been studying diabetes and kidney disease. So at the time that you were diagnosed, was it probably about then? Nobody was doing anything. And at that time, Washington University in St. Louis was the pinnacle of metabolism. All things diabetes went to either WashU or the Brigham. But nobody paid any attention. You're exactly right. And so that actually became my life's work, was focusing on complications and understanding the relationship between metabolism and complications. And actually, Ralph DeFranzo and I in 1987 gave Florazin to diabetic rats for the first time, which was the predecessor of the SGLT2 inhibitors. But it's taken 35 to 40 years to get to where we have the tools to offer treatments for people today who were in your condition 40 years ago. But you're right, there was a blind spot by the medical community and actually by the public health community. But now we know better and we have to do better. I wish we could have done better for you. But now really the focus has to be on awareness and detection, because we now have the interventions that truly can, if we had met you then with what we have today, I guess I'm optimistic to say that your outcomes would have been very different. But that's the way it was at the time. And no excuses for it, but thank goodness we can do better now, and I guess I'm repeating myself. This is why I say we have a moral and ethical obligation to do better. The number of people on dialysis in the United States doubled between 2000 and 2019 to over 800,000 people. But that doesn't count the 90% who die on the road to kidney failure, so you can multiply that. And so it's not just preventing progression to dialysis, It's actually saving lives. And I'm glad you all are here, but I want to say congratulations, you survived, because most of our patients don't. But now we can change that.
Question up here.
It's really encouraging that someday we might not need transplants, but in the meantime, Tom, could you investigate the group that are giving the transplants? Because there's some real problems there too.
Yes, very good question. Yeah, in my reporting and my research, there's a clear lack of transparency in transplant lists, how you get put on them, who is eligible, how you get bounced off of them. A lot of that, in my reporting at least, seems to have to do with race, to be honest with you. Yeah, that's an entire other chapter. There are many chapters of the book which Rob thanked me for not writing 600 pages, but I was right there. I was about to do it. There are many other aspects of this that really need to be delved into, and transplant is absolutely one of them. Another is, as Dr. Tuttle mentioned in passing, I've talked about, let's say, the easy targets, the big bad corporations who are doing their part to make things difficult. But, you know, the CMS is I won't say complicit necessarily, although that might be the word, at least cooperative, compliant with big dialysis. And, you know, that's another problem in another book, another chapter. So, yeah. But your point is very well taken, that we need a lot more transparency in the transplant world.
Well, part of the problem is the incentives are dialysis. That's what gets paid for. And so you have very activated patients like Andrew, and maybe some people in the audience who've gotten themselves on more than one transplant list, and respectfully, you are the privileged few. Many people from disadvantaged communities end up on dialysis and they don't even know a kidney transplant is possible, and nobody tells them, because they make a lot of money from dialyzing them. There's no incentive to move them off dialysis onto transplantation. So that's a health policy issue that has to change.
Yeah, and in fact, if you look at what happens when a practice, a dialysis practice that's run by a handful of nephrologists is bought out by one of the big two, the number of transplants craters. You know, that's cash flow, right? But it's also human beings. And, you know, that's reprehensible. There's no excuse for this.
Okay, I see two more questions here. Right to you, right after her.
Yes, I echo that. Thank you for being here, all of you. I wanted to ask, you know, clearly there has to be a change, you know, to know that the dialysis that is saving my daughter's life in the short term is killing her in the long term. Where do we start our efforts? Where do we spend our lobbying energy? Where do we write letters? Where do we send our money? You know, where do we start to, as citizens, to make the changes?
I would definitely say get active with several of the organizations. There's the National Kidney Foundation, which I'm sad to say in Spokane it feels like a desert, but they do have an office in California that represents us in Washington. There's also another great patient organization, the American Association of Kidney Patients. They do a lot of publications. They also do a lot of advocacy work. And anytime you could become a member of one of those organizations and you have any kind of talent, they will knock on your door, believe me. Yeah.
Okay. With this, I'm a 30-year dialysis nurse with Fresenius. I retired 2 years ago. And I'm a hemodialysis nurse, so it's the clinics. They come in, we dialyze them, and they go home. I see that is where the biggest change needs to happen, because these places some of them are absolute hellholes, and you work really, really hard not to have that happen. But when your staffing model is to the point to where you may have one nurse or two nurses for 20, 30 patients, and a handful of patient care technicians who may or may not be dedicated, so it's a dangerous situation for that. And basically what I would like to see, because the the treatment facilities are there. The people are coming. They're going to come. They're going to come every day. Every single day, they're going to, regardless of what's happening, they still have to be dialyzed. So what I see with these corporate situations, they need to work on their staffing models now and help what's happening now in our facilities.
That is one of the issues that in California, I don't know if you followed the series of ballot initiatives proposed by the Healthcare Workers Union, SEIU, UHW, and those proposals were extremely good, and they involved staffing ratio increases, capping of profits, and plowing back the excess profits into improved treatment and improved lives for the workers, because as you suggest, workers are also, in many cases in these big dialysis clinics, victims of a situation where they signed on to help people be healthy, and they are forced to be complicit in their ill health, and that is not a good. So the result of these 3 ballot initiatives spread over 5 years is that Big Dialysis spent $300 million on a series of scare tactics and ad campaigns to quash these and ultimately defeat them. And $300 million could go a long way to improving the life of people in these facilities. You wonder what kind of dynamics, what kind of calculations go on when they'll say, okay, we'll drop $300 million, basically set fire to $300 million that could be used to improve our patient care, because in the long term, it's obviously going to be a good investment. We're going to make more money. That is broken. And to come back to your question, what do we do? Another very straightforward thing is we have antitrust laws in America. Last time I checked, they haven't been applied recently for the last 2 generations, but they exist. And the FTC should be looking into this. This is another thing, right? Smaller, bigger is not better, and free markets are good as long as they're free.
Well, look, I want to thank you all so much. Some of our best Northwest Passages events were when it was over. The audience could come and ask more private questions. We have tables set out so that you all can do that and talk afterwards, and I really hope you'll do that. Tom's books are available tonight, and I hope you'll get them. This one's not 600 pages. You can knock it out in like 2 days. 2 days.